And bingo, we're back. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time it happens to be, wherever you happen to be in the world right now. At the moment, it's 2:01 in the morning here in California. And what we got? Ronnie, hello. Leah, hello. Sarah, Ilva, hello, sweetie. Patrick, hi. Jacqueline, and Maria Jose, and Petra. Sarah, did I say hello already? No. Hi, Sarah. Good morning, mother-in-law. Hi, Hazel. Lots of love. Mwah. Holger. Hello, Holger. Fires, I'll explain in a moment, but no particular issue. Jeremy. Guten Morgen. Ja, ich schreibe. And who else we got? Mikhail, Michael. I've never remembered how to say your name, so you're going to have to remind me. Herr Van Sleen, Carol, Sherry, and Cliff. Hello, Cliff. Anyway, good to see you all. It's a pleasure to have you here with me, and I am going to read tonight. After much consideration, where I was thinking, well, maybe I should either read some of the sort of savage, violent short stories, which I do still have a few of left, or at least the more violent short stories. I decided instead to keep on with what we've been doing, namely reading an entire book. But because I still may change the format in the long run, I'm going to read another shortish book. Also, since I just read my very, very first book, I thought instead of reading you another early book or something, that I would in fact jump forward into the present. So what I'm going to read from tonight is going to be The Heart of What Was Lost, which was, of course, the book that started the whole Ostenard second trilogy. And if nothing else, I thought it would be an interesting contrast of style. Hello, Wouter. Hello, Svan. And I'm assuming it's Svan. It's S-Fan. So I'm just taking a shot on some of these things. So anyway, anybody who wants their name pronounced correctly when I try to say hello at the beginning of the show when people are first signing in, please feel free to let me know and, send me a notation. Say, by the way, it's pronounced Skizzle-Vizzle or whatever. I'm used to it. I've had people, one of my favorite memories as a writer was back many, many years ago when we still used to have the American Booksellers Association conventions, the big one where everybody would come. And what they would often do at these things is give away advanced copies of the books to, people who just signed up. So these were, pretty cool. And certainly in the case of the Dragonbone Chair, which is what I think I was signing, there's a pretty big book, so you're getting a lot of reading material for free. Those of you who like to buy on quantity, I know I've got a lot in my readers column. People are going like, I don't know, this book is only going to last me a week. But here, Tad's book, I'll get a couple of weeks out of that. But anyway, so I'm, all these people are coming in and I'm signing these, very nice, very hard to replace, very limited edition books, and this one guy comes up and says, it's Michael. And I went, okay, cool. And I start signing his name, and I hand it to him, and he looks at it and he goes, no, it's spelled Micherl. I just looked at him. I was like, I didn't say anything rude. I took it back. I wasn't going to get a whole new book out for that. I crossed it out and made some little jokey note in it and put the correct spelling in. But I was like, am I the first person who's ever suggested to you that if you want somebody to write your name and it's Michael, but it's got an R in the middle of it, you might want to warn them first? Just like if you happen to have a Bushman asterisk or exclamation point or something like that, you might want to inform people and not just assume. Anyway, so I'm used to that. So I do my best, but I don't know how every name can be pronounced. Michiel, says Michiel van Sleen. Or Van Sleen, I don't know, because it's two E's, but it's Dutch. So anyway, Michiel, good to see you. I thought it was something Michiel, but I'm close. Anyway, lovely to see you again. Always a pleasure. Sorry to stumble over your names. That's one of the reasons I'm named Tad. My parents just went, he make it easy on him. Give him a one-syllable name. So when people suddenly wake him up in the middle of the night and ask him to identify himself and explain why he's sleeping on a park bench, he can say, me Tad. Nothing too complicated. Anyway, and my shirt today, there we go. My friend Rick, my guitarist friend Rick, gave me this. We both went to Palo Alto High School. As far as I know, neither of us actually dropped out, but it seemed like a good idea. So, and I wear it a lot. I enjoy it. I actually met one of my old high school classmates that I hadn't seen in 30 years or something, because I walked into a liquor store here in the Santa Cruz area, and he looked over at me and said, "Did you go to Palo Alto High School?" And I said, "Yeah." What year?" he asked. I told him, and he was like, "Me too." And I went, Do I, Gary?" And he's like, "Yeah, are you Tad? I remember you." So we had one of those conversations. I still go in there all the time and see him, and we kind of catch up with stuff. So anyway, so that's at least one. And that's actually, here's a true story. One of the reasons I kept my name, despite the fact that I've never particularly liked Tad, especially as a writer's name, for various reasons, which I'll explain in a moment. But one of the reasons I hung on to it was because I thought, well, if I ever, do anything semi-interesting someday, it'd be nice to bump into people or for people to bump into my work and go, "Oh, that's Tad. I remember him in high school. He never shut up. I wonder what he's up to now," or, whatever it might be. So, but the other thing about my name is, many of you listening in tonight are, oh, okay, Wouters just sent me a correction on Michiel's name pronunciation. Yeah, didn't I guess that? Didn't I say Slane? Anyway, so many people in Europe won't perhaps get this particular connection. I don't know. It depends on how au courant you are with American culture, such as it is. But in America, all the time I was growing up, Tad was like a total preppy name. And if you don't know what preppy means, it means prep school. It means usually sort of East Coast money. The Trumps went to prep school, not that it did them any good. That kind of thing. It's kind of people who go like, "Yeah, Tad and I are going out on the bay, because we're going to give the new sailboat a little breakdown, just run it out and see how it goes, and then of course, we're going to meet Babs and Margaret, and we're going to have mimosas or something, So, and I never felt like a Tad. I'm Californian. I'm not a preppy. I'm not only that. My family didn't have money. My grandfather was a shopkeeper, and on one side, and the other grandfather was like somebody's driver, but like at a ranch. So, we're not talking like, going to the big Manhattan restaurants or something. We're talking about working on a ranch in California. I'm not really a preppy type, and for that reason, I was never entirely comfortable with the name, but my given name is Robert, and I never felt very connected to that either. As I've told many people, if people call me Robert, it was only substitute teachers in school reading my name off the roll sheet, and now it's people who are usually telemarketers going, "Yeah, hi, Robert." I'm like, "You don't know me, do you? You're just pretending." So anyway, I've never been all that excited about the name Tad. Never felt it really described me. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be named something like Christopher. It had a little more kind of, a little more oomph to it. But I also wanted to hang on and be able to retain contact with people, and that people might see my work and go, "Oh, it's Tad. I haven't seen him since junior high school. I wonder what he's up to. Oh, that's interesting. He's a writer now," or whatever it was. I mean, at the time when I was doing this, I was using it in all my creative endeavors, and writing just happened to be the one that worked out, more or less. So anyway, all right, sorry for the long digression, although I do digress quite a bit, as you may have figured out. And by the time I run out of things to read, these Sunday get-togethers may be entirely digressive. There may be nothing left. I'll just be here just babbling away about stuff, going like, "Yeah, And my favorite kind of string is twine. Who knows? But before it gets to that point, I do have things to read, so I'm going to read to y'all. Quick update: we're all well here. We have had to. We're having. My parents are having a very limited, socially distanced get together in celebration of their 60th wedding anniversary, which is super cool. Except, unfortunately, because we have a daughter who has a lot of health issues that COVID-19 is not a good combination with. We can't go, and I'm miserable and grumpy about that. Not, on my parents' part for having and they're going to probably have a big anniversary thing, post-pandemic. But, I mean, obviously, they're having their 60th anniversary. They're not young folk anymore, so I'm really irritated that I can't take the family and be there. Anyway, Kermit voice. You like Kermit the Frog? Kermit voice? Sarah over here wrote Kermit voice. I may just kind of have a naturally resting Kermit voice. Oh my God, what a world. What a world. I'm having a tough week. A lot of us are having a tough week. There's a lot of difficult stuff going on. But we here, at least I can speak for my own personal family, we're doing okay. We're hanging in. We're staying kind with each other. We're, putting up with stuff. And we don't have that much to complain about, really. So one nice thing about being a writer is I can continue my work and, to a certain extent, my income continues in its same spotty, patchy sort of way, at least for another little while, until the gaps in my work and publication history begin to catch up. So, and at the moment, we're not publishing anything because that's kind of what's going on in the marketplace for the publishers at this point. Anyway, I'm See, this is what happens. If I don't start reading immediately, I just start talking, and it goes on and on and on. And somebody just commented that they like it when I digress from the. Oh, Ilva, hi, thank you, sweetie. When I digress from the current digression, there's a reason that Thomas Pynchon is one of my favorite writers, and Dickens, because I love multiple. I love multiple recursion. I like recursiveness, but then recursiveness that leads to other recursiveness, which is why I became such a Pynchon fan. Anyway, and I also say anyway a lot because it's, all of this recursion, these circular things. I'm going to read a little bit from the, actually I'm going to read the acknowledgments before I start reading from The Heart of What Was Lost, because it explains a little bit. It's not the acknowledgments, it's the dedication. So, because this actually pertains to you folks out there. So first I'm going to read the dedication, and then I'm going to start reading The Heart of What Was Lost. So for those of you who don't know what this book is and why I'm reading it or where it fits into my oeuvre, to use a fancy foreign word, this is the dedication. The Ostenard books have been incredibly important to me, and also to lots of readers. So writing a sequel to the original story after so many years away has been a daunting and even occasionally terrifying project, but it has also been a joy. This book, The Heart of What Was Lost, starts the journey back to Ostenard by filling in an important piece of history left out of the last volume of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Another name for that would be Two Green Angel Tower. Namely, the tale of the Norns after the Storm King's War ended in their defeat. I honestly never planned to return to Ostenard. By the way, I sometimes also pronounce it Ostenard. I tend to say Ostenard more often, but as I'm always telling readers, I don't give a ding-dang-dongle how you pronounce the stuff in my books. You pronounce it any way you feel comfortable. And many of my own pronunciations developed before I knew what the rules were, and they're wrong. Miriam L. in the Ostenard books is an example. She should be Miriam Mela or Miriam Mella, but instead it's just Miriam L. And that's because I came up with the name and how I wanted to pronounce it before I figured out how the Nabani language actually works. Anyway, I honestly never planned to return to Ostenard, at least not in any major way, and it wouldn't have happened had it not been for all the kind people who asked me over the years, but are you going to go back to Ostenard? And what about those twins and their birth prophecy? Come on, you can't tell me that wasn't setting up a sequel. Yeah, actually, it wasn't, but people didn't believe me for a long time. Once it got to be about 25 years, I think they finally figured out, oh yeah, he was telling the truth. He really wasn't planning a sequel. After enough readers asked, I started to think about it. A story finally came to me that I wanted to tell, so now, with this small volume and much more to come, I returned to those lands I thought I'd left behind. Thus, this book is dedicated to the readers who have always wanted to know more about Ostenard, about Simon and Miriamel and Binnabic and the Scythi and the Norns, who wanted to know more of the history of Ostenard before the first books began, and also the history that followed the more or less happily ever after of the first story's ending. Your love for the characters and the place was something I never expected. I finally gave in, and I'm glad I did. Thank you all for your support and kindness. I'm doing my best to make you glad you encouraged me. Welcome back. And for those of you who are new to Ostenard, I paraphrase one of our heroes, Simon Snowlock, as he greeted an ally at the end of the first story. Come and join us. You have a world full of friends. Some of them you don't even know yet. All right. And as I start the book here, I will mention one thing only, which is, like a lot of my longer books, this one has several plot lines. The only one I feel any need to explain to you is that the second one you're going to hear that begins, "This is a true story." This is a woman of the Norn Society, or the Hikedaya Society. So in other words, the people who were the bad guys in the first set of books and are still troublesome in the second set of books. But anyway, so that when you hear Lady Miga St. Janata of the Order of Chroniclers, she is writing from the Norn perspective. Everything else should be pretty clear from what happens. Anyway, so with that, I am going to start reading officially from The Heart of What Was Lost. And this is going to be another book where, because it's a single volume, but it's longish, I'm going to be reading it both tonight and then tomorrow, my time, later today, my time. And that, like I did with Tail Chaser's Song, because it's a lot easier for me than trying to find something to read to each group. And since we're recording everything, it's there. Anyway, so, the Ruined Fortress. At first, in the flurrying snow, he thought the soldier stumbling in front of him through the icy mud of the Frost March Road had been wounded, that the man's neck and shoulders were spattered with blood. As he steered his horse around the hobbling figure, he saw that the blobs of red had a regular shape and pattern, like waves. He reined up until the soldier was limping beside him. "Where did you get that?" Porto asked. "That scarf." The soldier, thin and several years younger than Porto, only stared up at him and shook his head. "I asked you a question. Where did you get it?" "My mother wove it for me. Piss off." Porto settled back in his saddle, amused. "Are you really a Harborsider, or is your mother a bit blind?" The younger soldier looked up at him with a blend of confusion and irritation. He thought he was being insulted, but wasn't sure. "What do you know about it?" "More than you do, as it turns out, because I'm from the rocks, and we've been drubbing you lot at Town Ball for centuries." "You're a Shoro, a geyser, and you're a dogfish, dim as can be. What's your name?" The young foot soldier looked him over carefully. The two waterfront neighborhoods, Setros, as they were called in Ansis Pelopé, the largest city on Perdruin, were ancient rivals, and even here, hundreds of leagues north of the island's shores, it was obvious that his first impulse was to brace for a beating. "Tell me yours." The man on the horse laughed. "Porto, of Shoro Bay, owner of one horse and most of a suit of armor. And you?" "Endry, baker's son." At last, and as if he had been holding it back, The youth smiled. He still had most of his teeth, and it made him seem even younger, like one of the boys who had run beside Porto's horse, waving and shouting as he made his way through Naban all those months ago. By the love of you, Cyrus, you're a tall one, aren't you? Endry looked him up and down. What are you doing so far away from home, my lord? No lord me, just a man lucky enough to have a horse. And you're freezing to death because you can't walk fast enough. What happened to your foot? The younger soldier shrugged. Horse stepped on it. Not your horse. I don't think it was, anyway. It wasn't. I'd have remembered you with your harborside scarf. I wish I had another. I'd even wear one in damned Shoro blue. It's so bloody cold here, I'm dying. Are we in Rimmersgard yet? Crossed the border 2 days back. But they all live like mountain trolls up here. Houses built of snow and nothing to eat but pine needles. Climb up. What? Climb up? First time I ever helped the dogfish, but you won't even make it to the border fort like that. Here, take my hand and I'll pull you up to the saddle. When Endry had settled behind him, Porto gave him a sip from his drinking horn. It was terrible, by the way. What was terrible? The beating we gave you lot this year on St. Tonato's Day? Your dogfish were weeping in the streets like women. Liar. Nobody wept. Only because they were too busy begging for mercy. You know what my father says? Go to the palace for justice, go to the church for mercy, but go to the rocks for liars and thieves. Porto laughed. For a sniveling harborsider, your father is a wise man. This is a true story, if words can be true. If not, then these are only words. Once upon the past, during the preserve of the Queen's 16th High Celebrant, in the era of the Wars of Return, our people, the Cloud Children, were defeated by a coalition of mortals and the Zidaya, our own treacherous kin, at the battle for Azua. The Storm King, Inaluki, returned to death, his plans in ruins. Our great Queen Utuku survived, but fell into the Ketayindra, a healing sleep nearly as profound as death. It seemed to some of our people that the end of all stories had arrived, that the great song itself was coming to an end so that the universe could take its next age-long breath. Many, many of our folk, who had fought for their queen in a losing cause, now departed from the southern mortal lands with thoughts only of returning to their home in the north, ahead of the vengeance of the mortals, who would not be content with their victory, but would strive to overthrow our mountain home and extinguish the last of the Cloud Children. This was the moment when the people were nearly destroyed. But it was also a moment of extraordinary grace, of courage beyond the proudest demands we make upon ourselves. And, as things have always been in the song of the people, in this too, even the moments of greatest beauty were perfumed with destruction and loss. Thus it was for many warriors of the Order of Sacrifice when the Storm King fell, as well as those of other orders who had accompanied them to the enemy's lands. The war was ended. Home was far, and the mortals were close behind, vermin from the filthiest streets of their cities, mercenaries and madmen who killed, not as we do, regretfully, but for the sheer, savage joy of killing. From Lady Miga St. Janata of the Order of Chroniclers. I'd hoped you might be exaggerating, said Dukas Grimner, but it is worse than I could have guessed. An entire village, said Sludig. No sense to it. He scowled and made the sign of the holy tree. Like the Duke himself, the young warrior had seen terrible things during the war just ended, things neither of them would forget. Now another dozen bodies lay sprawled before the tithing barn in a chaos of mud and bloody snow, mostly old men and a few women. along with the hacked carcasses of several sheep. Women and children, lamented Sludig. Even animals. At his Grimner's feet, the body of a child had been half buried by snow, the blue-gray fingers still reaching for something, the arm stretched like a trampled flower. How terrible it must have been for these villagers to wake in the night and find themselves surrounded by the deathly white faces and soulless eyes of the Norns, creatures out of old and terrifying tales. Dukas Grimner could only shake his head, but his hands were trembling. It was one thing to see the mortal ruin of a battle, to see his men dead and dying, but at least his soldiers had swords and axes. At least they could fight back. This was something else. It made his gut ache. He turned to look at Ayaminu. The Sitha woman had been standing a little apart from the Duke's men, gazing at the muddle of footprints and hoofprints, beginning now to disappear beneath a fresh sifting of white. The steep, golden planes of her face and her long, narrow eyes were alien and unreadable, as she examined the ugly work of her people's Norn kindred, different from her only in the color of their skin. "Well," his Grimner demanded, "what do you see?" "I see only murder. Your fairy cousins are monsters." Ayaminu's inspection continued for a long moment. She seemed to make little distinction between disturbed snow and tumbled bodies. "The Hikedaya were stealing food," she said. "I doubt they would have bothered to harm anyone, but they were discovered." "What of it?" Sludig was barely containing his anger. "Do you make an excuse for them because they are your kin? I don't care what you call them, Norns, white foxes, or what you said. Name them as you like. They are monsters. Look at these poor people. The war is over, but your immortal fairy cousins are still killing." Ayaminu shook her head. "My kind are not immortal, only long-lived. And as recent battles have shown, both my folk and our Hikedaya cousins can die. Thousands of them have done so in the past year, many at the hands of mortals like you." She turned to stare at Sludig, but her face was all but expressionless. "Do I excuse this murder? No. But if the Hikedaya were hungry enough to steal from a mortal settlement, they must have been very hungry indeed, to the point of madness. Like my own folk, they can survive on very little. But the North has suffered from the Storm King's frosts a long time. We Rimmersmen have suffered from this endless winter too, without needing to destroy entire villages." Ayaminu gave the young warrior a bemused look. "You Rimmersmen, who came out of the West a mere few centuries ago and killed thousands of my people, and just this year brought death to so many of your Hernestiri neighbors? Damn it, that was not us!" Sludig was trembling. "That was other Rimmersmen, under Skali of Kaldskreik. Duke is Grimner's sworn enemy." The Duke put his hand on Sludig's arm. "Quiet, man. That argument has no ending." But at this moment, with his insides knotted by the sight of the dead villagers, his dead villagers, the people God had given him to protect, his Grimner could not look on the Sitha woman with any kindness. But for the golden hue of her skin, the fairy woman could have been one of the Norns, the corpse-white creatures whose murderous work lay all around him. "Remember that our memories are not as long as yours, Lady Ayaminu," he said as evenly as he could manage. "And neither are our lives. I gave you leave to come along with us at the request of your Lord Jariki, friend of our new king and queen, but not to pick fights with my men." In fact, it had only been the strong urgings of the newly crowned Simon and Mirianel that had convinced his Grimner to let the Sitha woman accompany them at all, but he was still not certain he had made the right decision. He looked down the hill where his men waited in disordered ranks, stretching half a league back down the Frost March road. They were Rimmersmen, for the greatest part, along with a few hundred soldiers from other nations who had missed most of the fighting in Urchester, but had been hired to reopen the empty forts along the northernmost borders between the lands of the Royal High Ward and the defeated Norns. If any of them had expected the White Foxes simply to slip harmlessly back across the border, they were now learning otherwise. This village was Finnbogi's. Bulky, shaggy-bearded Brindur, brother of the Thane of Skoggy and an important Thane in his own right, had survived the final battle at the Hayholt, but had left a great deal of blood and most of one of his ears behind. His helmet sat oddly over the bandages. I saw him die just outside the castle gate, your grace. Had his head torn off by a giant who threw it over the Hayholt wall. Enough. And enough of this place, too. Miss Grimner waved his hand in angry disgust. God preserve me, I can still smell the foul creatures even through all this blood, as though they were here only a moment ago. It is not likely, began Ayaminu, but fell silent at the Duke's violent gesture. We should have rounded up all the White Foxes when the battle ended, Miss Grimner said. We should have taken their heads, prisoners or not, like Crexus when Harcha fell. He looked to the Sitha. That works for fairies as well as for ordinary men, doesn't it? Cutting their heads off? Ayaminu stared at him but did not answer. His Grimner turned his back on her and crunched away through the drifts, back to his waiting soldiers. Your Grace, a rider is coming. He bears Jarl Vigri's banner. His Grimner blinked and looked up from his map to scowl at the messenger. Why do you shout so, man? There's nothing strange in that. The young Rimmersman colored, though it was hard to see against his burned red cheeks. Because he does not come along the eastern fork of the road from Elvitsala, but the western fork. Impossible, said Sluted. Do you mean from Narved? Demanded the Duke. What nonsense is that? He stood, bumping the makeshift tabletop with his belly, so that the stones meant to represent armies jiggled and jumped. Why would Vigri be in Narved when he's supposed to be protecting Elvitsala? Vigri was one of the most powerful Rimmersman lords after his Grimner himself. He, and his father before him, had been some of the Duke's most steadfast supporters. It was impossible to believe that the Jarl, as earls were called here in the north, would wander away from his sworn duty. His Grimner shook his head as he pulled on his fur-lined gloves. Thank the ransomer my Gutrun is still safe with our friends in the south. Has everyone in these lands run mad? He pushed his way out of the tent, was saluted close behind. The Sitha woman, Ayaminu, followed, quiet as a shadow slipping along the ground. The messenger and his horse were wreathed in the plumes of their frosty breath. Beyond them, the immensity of the Dimmerskog forest covered the eastern side of the road in snow-blanketed green, the trees silent as sentries frozen at their post, rank upon rank, until they disappeared into white mist. What do you have for me, fellow? The Duke demanded. Is it truly from Vigri? Why is he not at Elvitsala, defending the city? The dismounted rider did his best to bend a knee, but he was clearly almost too cold and weary to stand. Here, your grace, he said, holding out a folded parchment. I am but the messenger. Let the Jarl himself speak. His Grimner frowned as he read, then waved to his carles. Give this man something to eat and to drink. Sludig, Brinder, Floki, we must have words. My tent. Inside, the men crowded around the Duke, anxious but silent. Ayaminu had come in as well, but she stayed to the shadows, as ever, still and watchful. Vigri says that the White Foxes have been returning north through our lands for over a month, mostly in scattered handfuls that stayed far from our towns and villages, his Grimner began. But one large group, well armed and many of them mounted, were too big to ignore. This one traveled slowly. Vigri says they are carrying the body of a great Norn leader back to Sturmerspike. Perhaps even the queen of the Norns herself. A body, said Iamino from her place near the doorway. Perhaps, but it is not the queen's. Utuku's silver mask is not dead. She has suffered a terrible defeat, but we would have known if she had perished. And although her spirit was present at Azwa, the place you call the Hayhold, her bodily form never left Nakiga. She still waits inside the great mountain. Isgrimnur frowned. Well, it is some other notable of the white foxes whose body they carry then. It doesn't matter. Vigri says this group have kept together in a small army, and because of that they plunder broadly as they go. They did great damage along the outskirts of Elvertsala, so Vigri came out to challenge them with much of the city's strength, several thousand men. The Norns fought fiercely, but at last he drove them away into the wilderness. Once he had done that, though, he did not feel he could simply let them escape. He glanced down at the letter, frowned again. Merciful Aidan, grant us good luck. He says he has trapped all those white foxes, hundreds of them, in a tumble-down Norn border fort on the very outskirts of their land, at Skuggy Pass. Their old castle Tangleroot, said Iamino. It can be no other. Vigri left most of his soldiers to protect Elvertsala, as Grimnir went on. He says the men he has are too few to press a siege in such an open place, and he fears the Norns will escape again. He asks us to bring our forces and hurry to his aid. The castle may be falling down, said Iamino, but the passages beneath it are deep and vast. The Hikedaya could hold it for a long time. Not if we drive them out like rats, said young Floki, with fire and black iron. His broad face told how greatly that idea cheered him. Let the corpse skins hide there until doomsday, Brinder said. Our men have fought hard and long. Many of them have been away from Rimmersgard for more than a year, and many who came with us now lie buried in Erkenland and foreign lands even farther south. What does it matter what a few hundred Norns do? Their power is broken. Their power is never broken while their murdering queen still lives. Sludig bore no title yet, but was certainly due for advancement. He had been one of his Grimnir's most trusted housecarls even before the war, and had done great deeds in the struggle against the Storm King. This might be the last of their generals and nobles, trapped in a ruin, far from their home. I think Floki has the right of it, Thane Brinder. This is our chance to stamp on the whiteskins, like baby snakes found under a rock. Isgrimnir did not much like either choice. There are no words for the hatred I feel for these monsters, he said slowly. For what they did to my son Izorn alone, I would kill every last one of them, man, woman, and child. He shook his head, as though it were almost too heavy for his neck to bear. But Brinder is right. Our people are weary. I do not want to see any more good men die fighting the fairies. Fight them today, or fight them again soon, Sludig said, slapping at one of the axes on his belt. The young Rimmersmen had taken the death of the Duke's son Izorn almost as hard as Isgrimnir himself. Even now, Sludig's hatred of the Norns ran hot and strong through his blood. When they have recovered enough to attack our lands again, my lord, we will surely wish we had dealt with them once and for all in their time of weakness. Isgrimnir sighed. Let me think, then. We have already made camp, so we have this evening at least. Leave me alone for a while. As the men went out, Iamino stopped at the tent's doorway, her eyes gleaming like golden coins in the reflected light. Do you wish me to stay, Duke Isgrimnir? He snorted. You wish to come along to listen and watch, and since that was the will of our king and queen, I said yes. Never did I say that I would let you give me advice. That is no surprise, I suppose. Elvert's race was always stubborn and bloody-minded. Perhaps the days of King Fingil Redhand are not as far in the past as you would like to think. Perhaps not, said his Grimner sourly. Already slowed by the coffin containing the body of their great warrior, High Marshal Ekisuno, one of the largest troops of the people was soon joined by more Hikedaya fleeing the southern defeat. Their swelling numbers now impeded their progress even more. Duke Isgrimner of Elvrichala, the leader of the northern mortals, pursued them with a great army of his race. But the people were also harried by one of the Duke's strongest allies, Jarl Vigri of Engidal. Caught between these two cruel enemies, a mixed party of cloud children, most of them from the Order of Builders, along with a few sacrifice warriors and those of other orders, were forced to take refuge in the abandoned fortress of Tangleroot Castle, where it seemed certain that the only conclusion would be their honorable and inevitable deaths. From Lady Miga St. Janata of the Order of Chroniclers. Although the roof and most of the upper floors had long ago collapsed, the great hall beneath Ogu Minurato, the fortress with tangled roots, was the least damaged part of the ancient tumble-down castle. It was here that the rubble had been cleared to make room for the great funeral wagon, whose wheels were almost as tall as Vieki himself. They had to be, because Ekisuno's mighty witchwood sarcophagus was too heavy to be carried by any smaller cart. The various celebrants now praying around it seemed no larger than children. Vieki was disturbed to see how quickly things had fallen apart here, outside the sacred protective walls of Nakiga. Only a few mortal centuries gone, and the natural world had all but swallowed Ogu Minurato, eating away at its walls and foundation, replacing them with its own substance, so that a sea of roots now covered the stone floors where the queen's sacrifices had once drilled. It was a reminder that the greater world lived at the same hurried pace as the mortals, that it was Vieki and the rest of his Hikedaya kind who were forever out of place. This world knows its own, he decided. After all, the Cloud Children were exiles from the sublime lost garden and could not expect any other place to fit them as well. We live too much in the past, said a voice behind him, as if contradicting his thoughts. Caught by surprise, Vieki turned to see his master, Yarike, watching the scene. Vieki made a gesture of respect. All praise to the queen. All praise to her Hamaka clan, he said in ritual greeting. But I beg your pardon, High Magister. I do not understand what you mean. Our love of the past impedes us, at least in this situation, Yariki said. By looks alone, Vieki and his mentor could almost have been brothers. The skin of the High Magister of the Order of Builders was smooth, his face as refined as his noble ancestry, but subtle, almost imperceptible tremors in his hands and his voice revealed his age. Yarike was one of the oldest of the surviving Hikedaya, one who had been born even before the fabled parting from their Zidaya cousins, the ones the mortals called Sithy. How can we live too much in the past, Magister? Vieki asked. The past is the garden. The past is our heritage, that for which so many of us have fought and died. Yarike frowned slightly. His hair was down. It hung beside his face on either side, like fine white curtains. Yes, of course, the past defines us, but the simplicity of your response disappoints me. He made a flicking gesture with his long fingers that was halfway between irritation and fondness. I am shamed, Lord. You are the cleverest of my host foremen. I should not have to explain myself. But I meant that we are suffering here and now because of our own overconfidence, Viekitsa. In such moods, his master's endearments often sounded like belittlement. Vieki waited silently. Remember what you first learned when you entered the Order of Builders so long ago? When you discover a flaw in stone, do not examine only the flaw, but how it formed, what it will do if left alone, and how the stone around it has responded. Do not neglect what beauty may have been created. If there were no flaws in order, life would be immeasurably poorer. Vieki nodded, uncertain of what this had to do with overconfidence. Please help me see how to examine this flaw, Master. That is a better response. Yarike nodded. Ask first, how many centuries have we planned this campaign against the mortals? The answer is for almost 8 great years, 5 centuries, as our enemies reckon it, since the Northmen first took mighty Azua from our kind. On that day, Azua and its Zidaya king, Inaluki, both fell to the enemy, and the precious witchwood groves were burned. So many mourning banners were flown when the news came in that all Nakiga was draped in white. I remember, Master. Mad with grief, the Magister continued, the people cried, never such loss again. But now we have been defeated once more. Surely not all this could have been foreseen, Master. Yarike shook his head. I do not criticize our sacrifices, who gave their all. And of course I could never find fault with the mother of the people. To criticize the queen is to doubt the most sacred of truths. No, it is not our plan of battle I criticize, but our overconfidence. And here we see one perfect example. He gestured to the immense coffin atop the wagon. I cannot help thinking that an army, even one with so distinguished a leader as High Marshal Ekisuno, should not be carrying such impediments as the marshal's casket along with them when they go into battle. If we had won, then whether Ekisuno had lived or not, it would not have been an issue. But since we lost, we are now forced to carry him with us, and as you no doubt noticed, we have been somewhat slowed by the great warrior's corpse and its monstrous, weighty coffin. In the hush of the ruined great hall, the only noise beside the murmur of the funeral celebrants repeating their death prayers was that of the wind keening in the broken ramparts above. Vieki wondered why his master would say such a thing, especially about a personage as important as the late Ekisuno. It seemed almost a sardonic joke, but it was never possible to be certain with the Order's High Magister, who was deep as the innermost chasms of Nakiga. All Vieki could do was nod and hope that he did not offend. Ah, I am glad you agree, Vieki-tsa, Yarike said. And here is Commander Hayano and his men, no doubt come to discuss how we may all sell our lives to protect Marshal Ekisuno's lifeless body. Now, Vieki was almost certain that his master was speaking in some satirical fashion, although he still could not understand why. Ekisuno had not only been the supreme leader of the queen's armies, he was also a descendant of the great Ekimeniso, the queen's long-dead husband. If there was anyone whose corpse should be protected from profane mortals, surely it was Ekisuno. Hayano stopped before them and briskly made the several appropriate signs. He had been one of the less effective league commanders of the Order of Sacrifice during the battle for Azua, which may have been a reason he had survived, but he had learned the trick of looking busy and important. How many of your builders do we have, High Magister? He demanded before he had even reached them. We will have need of their engineering skills to defend this place. Yarike was silent for long moments. For several moments, long enough to remind Hayano that he was outranked, not just by Yarike himself, but even by host foreman Vieki. When Yarike saw the realization finally cross the commander's face, a subtle but unmistakable flash of unease, he waited a moment longer, then said, "We have enough builders to make this place secure for a while, perhaps, League Commander, but not enough to defend it against a long and serious siege." "But there are many tunnels beneath us, Magister," Hayano said with poorly hidden surprise. "That is why this place is called Tangleroot. They will never be able to drive us out, and we will kill 10 for every one we lose." "I was aware of the reason for the castle's name, Commander." Yarike's words were dry as dust. "And if we have no other choice, then yes, each of us can sell his or her life very dearly. But even if we kill 20 for every one of our fallen, we still will not survive long, and we will be little help to those who await us back at Nakiga. Is that not our greater duty?" Hayano drew himself up. He may not have been one of the Queen's most successful officers, but he was a handsome, powerful figure, and Vieki knew him to be brave. Talk of duty had brought back his confidence. "My men and I are of the Order of Sacrifice, Lord Yarike," the commander said. "Our death songs are already sung. Whatever the outcome, we will make the Queen proud of us." "Certainly, if the Queen lives, that is, as we all so dearly pray she will." Vieki saw the sacrifice commander react in shock to old Yarike's words. "May the garden preserve her from harm, from all harm. Of course she will survive." "As we all pray." Yarike made the familiar sign that meant, "May the Queen live forever." "But in the meantime, we ourselves have two great responsibilities. Protecting the body of Ekisuno, the Queen's most noble general," said Hayano promptly. Yarike's nod was perfunctory. "Yes, of course, but also the lives of the Queen's living servants, my 100 and more builders, and your 3 dozen or so sacrifices, as well as the mixed 2 or 3 dozen from other orders, most of whom will be of little use in a real fight." "You would not expect the celebrants to fight beside sacrifices, would you?" said Hayano, looking uneasily at the funeral priests gathered around Ekisuno's coffin. "In any case, they have their own work to do." "If the choice is between all of us dying like rats and the celebrants taking a moment between prayers to swing a sword or throw a large rock, then yes, I think they should fight." Yarike's face was emotionless, but Vieki knew the Magister well enough to hear the anger in his voice. "And as the highest noble within this refuge, I expect my word to be obeyed." "Of course, High Magister," said Hayano quickly, but his face suggested he was suppressing more argument. Vieki thought the commander seemed helplessly transparent. Small wonder that, despite high birth, he still held only middling rank. "Good. Then I want you and your soldiers to make a survey of how we may best defend this place, Commander. We will put my builders to work shoring up the most needful spots. The mortals who have besieged us, what are they doing?" "At the moment, not much of anything," said Hayano. "They seem to think Ogu Minerato is already theirs, and that all they have to do is wait." "They are not entirely wrong," said Yarike. "We have little to eat, and the well is full of rocks. That, at least, is a task my builders can begin now. Go, League Commander Hayano. We will meet again when the first lantern appears in the sky." "Yes, Lord Magister." Hayano crossed his forearms over his breast in ritual acknowledgement, then led his sacrifices out again. When he was gone, Yarike shook his head. I am glad that the singers here with us have a field commander like Tsain Ka," he said. "She at least is clever and thinks before speaking. What is the Order of Song doing at this moment?" Viecki did not like the singers. Like most servants of the other orders, he distrusted the spell wielders and was terrified of their great master, Akinabi, Lord of Song, the most powerful person in Nakiga but for Queen Utuku herself. Tsain Ka said she would send her followers out in false skins to look upon the enemy's numbers and disposition, and that they would light the fires of unease among the mortals. Good. I'm glad to hear they are occupied. For a moment, Viecki thought he could see the weariness behind his master's immobile face. I will occupy our builders as well, master, he said. With your permission, I will go and see that the well is cleared of stones. Yarike nodded. Yes, do so, Viecki Tsar. Shoring up the defenses of this place will be thirsty work. He bowed. It will be done before the lantern is on the horizon. So if you don't want to spend the rest of your life soldiering, what are you doing here in the coldest part of the north, little dogfish? They were sharing Porto's horse, and the older man was trying to keep Endry distracted. The young man had gone pale when the northern thane in charge of the mercenaries had given them their orders, and in the 2 days' riding since then, Endry's thoughts had been spinning again and again through the same dismal eddy. Why aren't you home helping your father make seed cakes? I wanted to see something of the world. Porto laughed. And you succeeded. This is certainly something. Something dreadful. The youth suppressed a shudder. Honestly, it's an old story, Porto. Too foolish to tell. It was a girl. Ah, her stomach grew large and you began to feel the urge to travel. No. But the young man seemed almost pleased by the idea. No, not like that. She chose another man. Didn't want to be wed to a baker's son. Didn't want her pretty hands to turn red and sore kneading bread all day, I suppose. I couldn't. I didn't want to see her. Her family lived just across from us, so I followed Lord Halawe to Erkenland, to the fighting at the Hayhold, where Lord Halawe was eaten by dirt goblins, if I remember correctly. Endry winced. I didn't see it, but I heard about it. He made the sign of the holy tree. God rest him. He was a good man. Well, I've heard that. And God preserve us all. Endry made the tree again. Porto made the tree as well. So all this is just to avoid seeing a girl who threw you over? I didn't think I would end up here, that's certain. A moment later he brightened. But you, Porto? Do you have a girl back home? Porto nodded. My wife, Sida, may the Adon bless her and keep her. And our little son, who is but a babe in arms. The Lord only knows when I'll see either of them again. You'll see them again. When his mood shifted, Endry could be as cheerful and confident as a child. It reminded Porto of his younger brother, Andoro, dead 10 years or more, and gave him a pang in his chest. We will come out of this, the youth said, as though Porto had been the worried one. You'll see. His attempt at distraction successful, Porto smiled. I'm sure you're right. But he knew that the deep, silent woods and the gray sky would drag the young man back into worry before too long. Hey, do you know any songs? He asked. Endry laughed. The gallant men of Harborside, of course. I know all the words, even the part about laying the dogfish low. And me stuck in the saddle in front of you, unable to escape, Porto said. He rolled his eyes. Go ahead then, you ungrateful wretch. Make me regret all my kindness. Endry's singing had ended hours earlier, and conversation had ended not long afterward. As they rode deep between brooding hills, the cold grew and silence settled like a fog over the ancient road. They first saw the ruins of the castle from the base of the pass, a dark tumble of oblong shapes nestling close to the snow-flecked summit. As they drew nearer, hour by struggling hour, and as the walls of the pass rose higher and higher on either side, plunging them into mist and deep shadow, Porto began to feel he was being dragged helplessly toward the ancient fortress, as if it were some great mill whose stones would grind him to powder. "I don't understand," said Endry suddenly, his voice startling Porto out of the long quiet. He made the sign of the tree for perhaps the dozenth time in the last hour. "Sweet Elysia, why did we have to come to this dreadful place? Look at that! Why would Dukas Grimner bring us here? He said we were going to a border fort." "Stop your sniveling, southerner," called a young rimmersman riding near them. "You shame us all." The rider was thick as an ox, with a bristling reddish beard that covered much of his broad face. On his shield was painted a red eagle, which told Porto this must be Floki, Thane Brinder's son. "That is a border fort," Floki said. "It just happens to be one of the enemies, that's all." "Very clever," said Porto. "But my friend's right. We didn't join for this. We came for a post on the Rimmersgard border." "6 coppers, and food every month," said Endry. "1 silver, 4 coppers for me," Porto said, "because I have my own horse." "But I never said I'd fight the Norns." Porto could feel Endry shivering against his back and knew it was from more than the cold. "I want to go back," Endry said. "You didn't think you'd fight the Norns?" brayed Floki, his laugh loud and harsh. "What did you think you'd be doing in a border fort at the edge of the Norn fells?" "Don't let this one discourage you. We'll get back home again," Porto told his young friend, but he was not as confident as he tried to sound. "I'll take you with me, Endry. You'll like the rocks. My father is a dyer, a wealthy man. He'll give you a place, you'll see. My wife's father is a dyer, a wealthy man. He'll give you a place, you'll see." "He certainly won't give that one a place as a soldier," said the Rimmersman. "Not the way he moans." "Shut your mouth, Northman," said Porto. "I'm beginning to hate the sound of your voice." Brinder's son brought his horse closer, and for a moment Porto was afraid he'd have to fight him. But the Northman seemed to have noticed Porto's unusual height. "You'll feel differently about me when the white foxes are at you, you southern milksop." The bearded youth put his heels to his horse's ribs and raced ahead of them. "Then you'll be crying out for me, not your little catamite here," he called back over his shoulder. "Floki, come save me from the Vitrefar. That's what you'll say." "I pray that I lose my voice before my tongue ever shames me." It was an old Perdruinese saying which Porto had uttered many times, but he had never meant it more. "He's right, though," said Endry. "I am no soldier. I'm frightened. I fought beside the great Sir Camerus himself when he led Josua Lackhand's army in Naban. I was afraid then. I'm afraid now. There is no shame in that." "I don't care about shame, Porto. In all truth, I just want to go home." And that's where we're going to stop for tonight because, yes, it's already a little bit after 3 because I talked so darn much. Anyway, so that's the beginning. I hope for those of you who don't already know this saga, first of all, I hope I'm not hypnotizing you with my Bela Lugosi Dracula hands. I hope for those of you not familiar with the saga that you're clear that on the different viewpoints we're getting is Grimner and Sludig and Endry and Porto. They are all on the human side, on the mortal side. Iaminu, who is a Scythe, but who is, as the Scythe generally are, is more or less an ally of the mortals. Then we're getting Vieke and Yarike, who are Norns, or Hikadaya, and specifically the High Magister, the head of the builders, and his assistant, Vieke. And then we're getting the little bits from Lady Miga St. Janata, who is also a Norn, a high-ranking noble woman, and an important member of the Order of Chroniclers. So she's writing about what's happening as if it's an after-the-fact thing. So just in case you weren't clear on that. So anyway, so with that, I'm going to continue reading 7 p.m. my time here in California in about 16 hours or whatever that is. And I will continue reading it that way, the same way I did with Tail Chaser's song. So if you miss a section, you can always catch it up either on my Facebook page, on YouTube, on tadwilliams.com. It should be available somewhere so that you can stay up with the story if you want to. I'm very pleased with how The Heart of What Was Lost turned out. Although here's a bit of trivia for you. It was originally called The Heart of Regret. Right? Yes, The Heart of Regret. And various folks on my side of the biz were saying to me, "Oh my God, don't put regret in the title. That's like a word that will turn everybody off." So I renamed it The Heart of What Was Lost. I'm not sure there's any huge difference between the two, but that's why it's The Heart of What Was Lost. Anyway, and as you'll see, The Heart of What Was Lost is an actual thing. If you haven't read this story before, then there I'm giving you an insight. It's an actual thing, and it's going to show up in the story. So it's not merely a metaphor, kids. We're dealing with a complicated, kind of a grown-up writer-reader thing where, I hand these things out to you guys, and you look at them and go, subject matter, theme, metafiction, all that stuff. Anyway, oh God, I don't know why anybody listens to me. I don't listen to me anymore. I haven't listened to me for years. Okay, so with that, I thank you once again for joining me. For those of you who will be back with me at 7, I welcome you back then. If not, I will see you next week, I hope, at the same Tad time, same Tad channel. Until then, be good to yourself and to those around you, your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors. Together, we will get through all this. There goes a cat in the background. Hello, Lily. Together, we will get through all of this crap. Everything that has gone wrong in 2020 is survivable, and we will all get through it as long as we stick together, retain our sense of humor, and where possible, vote the bastards out. I'm not telling you which bastards to vote out. You can figure that out for yourself and apply it as you wish in whatever part of the world you're in. But definitely let's vote the bastards out. All right? Okay. Let's have a kinder, better world. That's my suggestion. Hey, I know it sounds crazy, but that's me. Anyway, so there we go. Thank you again for joining me. Real pleasure to see you all as always, and I will be talking to you again very